Well, good morning. Welcome everyone here. Thank you for joining us this morning. I hope that you feel the warmth and the welcome, the hospitality, but more than that, we hope that you experience God's welcome, His warmth, His forgiveness, His grace, His strength. What a blessing it is for us to join together as brothers and sisters in the Lord. All day yesterday, our elders got together for our semi-annual prayer retreat, and you have some amazing elders. You really do. I am so thankful. I came away from that energized and enthused from the time spent with our elders, and I was so grateful for that. So we've been going through this series on the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. We're calling it Unshakable, Thriving No Matter What Life Throws at You. And as a song we just sang reminds us that there are things that can happen in our life that can shake us up. As Daniel went through, Daniel had that first test when he was only 15 years old. When the Babylon Empire came in and withdrew about 25% of Israel and brought them back to Babylon. And so that was the first test, dealing with a life-shaking experience. The next time we talked about his test of conforming to others, conforming to the wishes of the king and so on, and he passed that test as well. And last week we looked at a test of faith when our beliefs are being ridiculed, and are we going to be able to stand firm on the truth of God? And today we're going to be talking about a test when the heat is on. I don't know if you know or remember that there was a movie that came out about 35 years ago. Eddie Murphy was a star of the Beverly Hills Cops movie, and the theme song for that movie was "The Heat Is On." Does anybody remember that? The heat is on, right? And I'm not going to sing it for you, but it actually was an interesting story behind that. They paid the guy who wrote it $15,000 to write it. It was kind of like a throwaway song in a sense, but it made millions of dollars because it was this real big hit, this catchy tune and so on. And the words are, "The heat is on, it's on the street, inside your head on every beat, and the beat's so loud it's deep inside, because the pressure's high just to stay alive, the heat is on." And so that was the theme. That was the theme for this movie. And today we recognize it became popular in popular culture to use this expression when we're feeling under pressure. The heat is on. The heat is on for whatever reason. It could be because of deadlines that you're experiencing at work, or the expectations you're experiencing there, or the pressures to conform, peer pressures that you're having at school or wherever. So this is a way to describe the test that you experience and whether you're going to be able to pass the test of the pressure that you're feeling in your life to whatever degree. And so in this story, we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 3. And we're going to be literally talking about when the heat is on, because spoiler alert, they get thrown into a fiery furnace, right? So literally the heat is on. But we're going to see how this pressure is being placed upon. Actually, Daniel's not in this story, by the way. It's just his three friends. Daniel may be out somewhere doing some of his work as part of his job. We just don't know. But it's referring to the three friends. So this is actually 15 years later when we first met them in Daniel chapter 1, when they were 15 years old and they went through that 3-year indoctrination program that the Babylonian Empire had for them. And when they were 18, they graduated with honors and so on, became governors of the province of Babylon. And then now this is 15 years later. So they're in their mid-30s now. They're no longer teenagers. And King Nebuchadnezzar is still the emperor of this empire, and he has got an ego to match no other ego. When you are the most powerful person in the world, you tend to have an ego that accompanies that. Trump! Sorry, excuse me, I've had a cold all week, and I'm sorry about that. But anyway, it's a big ego. So Daniel 3, if you have your Bibles, or if you want to follow along in your phone, it's in your sermon notes if you want to follow along there. Daniel 3, verse 1. So King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now this is huge, right? You're 90 foot, like you're not shy about thinking about yourself. Verse 2, then he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So this is interesting. We actually get some insight into the government structure. You have the most powerful officials first, and they kind of go down the line there. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, by the way, I'm going to purposely say Abednego instead of the way John wants me to say it, just to bug him. But anyways, those three individuals, they've been now governors in the province of Babylon for 15 years. They're Jewish, but they're governors in Babylon, so it's a very interesting situation. Verse 3, so all these officials came and stood before the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 4, then a herald shouted out, people of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Now, there's no question Nebuchadnezzar is on a power trip. He is not content with being the most powerful man on the planet. He is not content to just be a king. He wants to be God. He wants to be worshipped. He wants to have everyone revere him as a divine being. And so this is the oldest temptation in the book, by the way. Satan is the one who tempted Adam and Eve, is that if you obey me, then you will be like gods. That was a temptation that they had. And so Nebuchadnezzar falls into temptation, and he commands them to obey, to worship him, and if they don't, they'll be thrown into fire. Now, this is a fascinating story, and it may seem a little bit odd to us. I mean, it's 2,600 years ago that this happened, and we kind of may wonder what kind of relevance this has to us. But let me share with you a few things that I think are similarities in our cultures from the culture 2,600 years ago. And the first one is this, that the world still creates images for me to worship. It may not be 90-foot statues that we're worshiping, but there still are people, there are celebrities, there are actors, there are athletes, there are royalty, there are all kinds of people that we prop up and we say these are people that we should really worship, that we should, there's this larger-than-life kind of way that we bring these people up. We see them on the red carpet, we see them in stadiums, we see them at concerts with the light and the smoke, and people are fawning over them, and there's this sense of this worship, and so we actually end up worshiping beauty and sex and power and fame and popularity and pleasure and all of these things, and they're just as real as this 90-foot statue that was placed by Nebuchadnezzar. So there still are images that the world creates that we are tempted or designed or invited to worship. Secondly, the second thing we have in common is that we create a false image of ourselves. I would say every day you and I are tempted to create a false image of ourselves. And the reason why is because we want people to accept and love us for who we aren't. We're not content. We're worried that people will not accept and love us, and so we create this false image. And we want to be better than who we really are, and so we do all kinds of things to create this image. And I think that's one of the reasons why Facebook was created, so we can create this false image of ourselves. I'm being somewhat facetious, but there's been lots of commentary about this issue in social media where we present this image of who we would like other people to see us, that we're always happy, that our life is all together, that look at where we're traveling, look at the food and the wine that we like to eat and drink. By the way, does anybody think that's weird that we take pictures of our breakfast and say, hey, this is what we eat for breakfast? Isn't that cool? Like, I don't know really what that is. But anyways, we create this, all part of this deception. It's all part of creating this image of who we would like other people to see us, and it's really a false image. And it's because we are so desperate in need of being loved and accepted and revered, and really ultimately to be worshipped. I don't know if you've, I'm sure you've experienced this, where you've found somebody who tends to idolize themselves. You know, they talk about themselves, they talk about how creative and smart and able they are, and you have to adjust to their life, adjust to their schedule, you have to be thinking about their needs. I mean, you probably have come across individuals like that, and we are seeing more and more of that, people who are experiencing or demonstrating pride and arrogance and narcissism in our society is quite rampant, actually. And so we still have that, where we tend to create a false image. The third thing about our culture that I think is true today, and that is that people get angry when you don't adopt their values. This is still true today. In fact, it's becoming increasingly so, I would argue. That when we don't adopt the values and what other people idolize, they get angry, they get upset. And so this is what was happening in this particular situation. When the music is to be played, then everybody is to bow down to worship Nebuchadnezzar, and these three guys don't bow down. They stay standing up. And so I would call them the stand-up guys, right? They're standing up. They're standing on principle. They're not bowing to the pressure and the values that Babylon would have at that time. And so they stayed standing while the rest of the nation bowed down. They're sticking out like sore thumbs. And this made people very upset. This is what we find in verse 8. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. They said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up." So now the heat is on, the pressure is on for these guys, because now their colleagues are calling them out. And there are people that are actually upset, and I think this is true for us as well, that people will be angry when you do not fall in line, when you do not accept the values and the idols that the culture of our world has, and they'll get angry. You might think the opposite is true, that if you're standing for what is true and that you're an honorable person, that you're a person of integrity, that you're faithful and you exhibit compassion and you're involved in Christ-like attributes and so on, that people would like you, but that's not necessarily the case. You know, even Jesus was crucified. Jesus was perfect, so even if you were perfect, there still are going to be people who will be against you, who will want to crucify you. And so in this case, we have these three guys who decided to challenge the king's narcissism. They knew that the king was powerful. They knew that he was the most, had the capability of doing all kinds of things, a powerful man, but they knew that he wasn't God. And they were going to pretend that he was. They were going to bow down to somebody who thinks that he is something that he isn't. Because he may be powerful, but he's nowhere near who God is. And so they drew a line in the sand and they said, this is going too far. And this is what you'll face in life too. When you draw a line in the sand, when you make a commitment, when you stand for something that is against the culture, when you, whether it's a moral stand or whatever it may be, whether at work or at school, there will be people that will be very upset. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew, for example, the 10 Commandments. In fact, the very first 2 commandments prohibited them from doing this. The first commandment is, "You shall have no other gods before me." Now, this is pretty clear. This is basically saying that nothing should be in first place other than God. Nothing should be in first place, but we do have a temptation to do that all the time. We're placing other things or other people in first place. It could even be a good thing, like a spouse or your children or your workplace, or it could be making money or your business or whatever. There could be all kinds of things that we put in first place, but if it's in first place, we're violating what God has called us to do. Don't put anything else in first place. There's nothing wrong with many of those other things, but they can't be in first place. It's called inordinate love, or we're loving something more than we should love. It's out of order. God should be first place. How do I know what is first place in my life? Well, what are you thinking about a lot? What is the thing that you think most about? What are you obsessed about? What do you love the most? And you can determine what is an idol for you potentially as you work through that. The second commandment is this: you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. So that's the second commandment. And this is the very reason why they're in Babylon in the first place. God actually warned them because of their idolatry. He says, you cannot continue to live like this. You cannot continue to bow down to something other than me. If you do, you will have serious issues. And he even mentions, the prophets actually mentioned by name, that you will be captured by Babylon and you'll be brought into, you'll be dispersed and all this. And so this is exactly why they're in Babylon, because they were not obeying this commandment. And God is not only warning them, but he's disciplining them now. He's saying, I want you to get rid of this idolatry. You can't expect me to keep blessing you when you're doing this. And so the three gentlemen that are now in this situation, they've learned this lesson. They're not going to bow down to any image any longer. So they stand up. They stand up on principle, on the truth, on who God is, and they're obeying him rather than man. So what is the reaction? Surprise, surprise, Nebuchadnezzar gets a little angry. It says here in the next verse, it says, he flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I've set up? I'll give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace, and then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? That's a very fascinating sentence, isn't it? What is he doing? He's actually taunting them. He says, you think your God is powerful. You don't know anything. I am God. I am the one who is more powerful than your God. And you'll see when I throw you into the fire. Who's going to rescue you then? So Nebuchadnezzar was still clear that he felt that he was God and more powerful than any other God. So what do you do? When the heat is on, when the pressure is on, the pressures of life happen to you. And now maybe you're not in a situation right now, but it's going to come, right? We know that. It's going to come. So what do? Well, let's look at what these men did, because they did it right. They handled it well. And first thing I see them doing is that they're not worrying about defending themselves. Don't worry about defending yourself. So when you go to work, or when you go to school, or when you're standing up as a believer in Christ, and you're finding yourself in a situation where you are at odds with others, you're drawing a line in the sand, you're taking a moral stand, you choose to do the right thing, and then somebody doesn't agree with you, and they get angry, the scriptures tell us, don't worry about it. Don't defend yourself. Just quietly allow God to take care of the situation. Allow God to take care of it. God's a lot better at dealing with fires than we are. He understands how to deal with it. And so verse 16, we have this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. And by implication, we don't need to defend God either. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able. We sang that song today. God is able. He is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. I love the way they answered him, by the way. They did not directly answer the question that Nebuchadnezzar was giving them. It says, like, who's going to rescue you? Who's more powerful? Like that kind of question. And they said, well, really, there's really no contest. We know who we serve. We serve the true God. There's absolutely no contest between you and him. We don't even have to dignify your question by answering it. And so we don't need to defend ourselves. We don't need to defend God. We're not worried about what's going to happen because we serve the real true God. It's a non-issue. And so I think that's one of the things that we need to take on. I've had some things that have happened over the years that sometimes leaders can be targeted by false accusations and that kind of thing, and I've experienced that. And why don't you defend yourself? Well, I don't need to defend myself. God will work it out. And thankfully, nothing has come out of some serious issues that have never come out as a result. We don't have to defend ourselves. We don't have to defend God. God will work it out. Secondly, remember that God has the power to save you. Remember that God has the power to save you. It doesn't matter how bad of a mess you are in, how difficult or how complex it is, God is able. God is able. He's God. And so it doesn't matter how serious it is, God can do anything. And then thirdly, not only do you have to remember that God is able, you also live with the expectation that He will save you. It's one thing to say, yep, God is able, He can do anything, blah, blah, blah. It's another thing to actually live in that expectation, live with that promise that He will actually rescue me, that He will save me. So last part of verse 17, it says, He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. So again, think about the situation where these three guys are here and all of the other high officials and advisors and all of the leaders and the whole nation of Babylon is bowing down, and it's just these three guys that are standing up. I mean, they are against all odds. And they are saying with all boldness and confidence that they know the truth, that God will save us. He will rescue us. Everybody else is conforming, everybody else is bowing down, and the pressure is huge to do this, but they understand the truth about who God is. And so it's easier for them to do that. It's easier for them to have that confidence because they know the truth. They know the God that they serve. And so they weren't afraid. One of the powerful things about God's Word, of course, is the promises that He gives us. Did you know that there are over 7,000 promises in the Bible? I mean, that's huge, right? And many of the promises that we have are related to how God saves us and rescues us and is present with us. One of the verses that we have read in one of our ministries last week or so is from Isaiah 43, verse 2. And listen to this. It's just a beautiful set of verses. When you go through the deep waters, I'll be with you. When you go through the rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fires of oppression, you will not be burned up. Now this is the promise that God has given to us, that we will not drown, we will not be burned up. He has promised this. He will do it. It's one of the promises He gives us. So believe that He does it and live that He will. And then the fourth one, announce your loyalty to God no matter what. This is what we talked a little bit last week as well. Stand for God no matter what happens, no matter what the outcome. So here are these three men who are declaring their confidence in God's ability to save them, that He will rescue them. And then they add this. This is very, very interesting. It says, but even if He doesn't rescue us, we want to make it clear to you, Your Majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up. I mean, this is a strong statement. This is not a feeble statement at all. They are announcing their loyalty to God no matter what, regardless of what happens. We know He can save us. We know that He will save us. But even if He doesn't, we're not going to change. We're not going to back down. We are standing firm on who God is. So how do you think Nebuchadnezzar responded to that? Well, if you think he was angry before, look at what happens, verse 19. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. Have you ever noticed that before? I mean, this guy's angry. His face gets contorted. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Like, how many times hotter do you need to kill somebody? Like, 1 time hotter is good enough to kill somebody, but he's like 7 times hotter. Do you ever wonder why it's that way? You know, I always thought it was related to his anger, and it may be. Like, he's so angry, let's match my anger by this heat that's going to be coming out. But I also wonder, actually, whether there's some insecurity in wondering, okay, these guys are so confident in their God. Maybe there's something to it, what they're saying. So I'm going to make sure that they're definitely going to be killed. Make it 7 times hotter. Right? So I think there's some insecurity coming out in Nebuchadnezzar right here. Verse 20, then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them in the blazing fire. Again, like, why do you need to bind somebody? Isn't that overkill? I think he's really nervous. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. So let's look at what happens next. This is really important what happens next. If you are going through a fiery, when the heat is on in your life, you're under pressure, and you're going in a furnace in your life, you really need to listen to the next part. Listen to what happens. First of all, when I'm going through the fire, God will walk through the fire with me. I can be confident that He is there with me, that you won't be alone, that God's presence is there. You can trust Him. We have that in scriptures all over the place. God will not abandon us. He will not forsake us. He will be with us, right? We find that all over. Verse 24, but suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumps up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace? Yes, Your Majesty, we certainly did. They replied. Look, Nebuchadnezzar shouted, I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed. And the 4th looks like a god. And so Nebuchadnezzar looks, and he's able to see the individuals walking around in the fiery furnace, and there's obviously something different about this 4th person, and he doesn't really quite understand. He's guessing that it's not human. There's some kind of a god, a son of God, or angel, as he says in verse 28, but he's thinking that it's some kind of divine being. And what he doesn't know, I mean, Nebuchadnezzar was a polytheistic, he believed in multiple gods, and he didn't know Jesus at this moment. But the truth is, in all likelihood, this was the Son of God. This was the pre-incarnate Christ, the Lord Almighty. And so we have Jesus there with them going through this because Jesus actually promised this. In Matthew 28:20, after the Great Commission, Jesus says it very clearly. He says that, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And again from Isaiah 43, which we read earlier, I am with you. I will be with you. If you're drowning, I will be with you. If you're in the fires, I will be with you. And so we have this assurance that God is going to be with us no matter what we go through, with the fire that we go through. So that's the first thing that we need to understand. The second thing we need to know is that God will make sure that we become completely unharmed. Like, this is an amazing part. Like, they're completely unharmed. The only thing that gets burned up is the ropes that they bound them in. The only man-made thing, right? The ropes get burned, so even in the fire they were set free. There was a sense of freedom. They were unbound while they were going through this fire. That's something else. In verse 26, then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. What? Like, where did this come from? Did Nebuchadnezzar just get converted right here now? The Most High God? I mean, but right up until now, he was saying, I am God, my gods are more powerful than your God, and now he says, your Most High God. Where did that come from? And so he's saying that there is something going on here, much more significant than he first realized. And he says, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the furnace. I love that. Stepped out of the fire. Notice, by the way, he didn't invite the fourth guy. Did you notice that? He just invited 3 guys. He knows the 3 guys. They've been the governors of his empire for 15 years. But that fourth guy, I don't know who that guy is. Like, you stay in the furnace. I don't want to see you. And then verse 27. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. I barbecued hamburgers last night, and I smelled like smoke. I mean, I don't know how this happened. Like, this is amazing. Unaffected completely by what just happened. It's not only are these guys unshakable, they're unbakeable. That's my next sermon series, the unbakeable ones, yeah. And thirdly, it will bring unbelievers to God. It will bring unbelievers to God. When the heat is on, and you are able to stand firm on the truth of who God is, you are able to trust God, believe in God, and know that He will rescue you. That is a powerful testimony to those who see you. And they will. They will see that. They will observe that. They wonder, how are you able to do this? God can use your pain to be a witness to other people. And so these guys really impressed Nebuchadnezzar. Notice what happens next, verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel." He didn't know that it was Jesus. So he sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. And that's an amazing verse. God used Nebuchadnezzar to say this. These are people who trusted in him. Wouldn't you want that? I mean, these guys were on the verge of death. And so you think about the end of life, and you want to have what you want to have on your tombstone. And this would be a great thing to put there. Here lies Richard, who trusted in him. There's nothing greater than that. They trusted in him. They defiled the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any other god except for their own God. So even that, we're reminded of this challenge to know, do we know what we're willing to die for? Are you ready to die for something? That's an important question to ask, right? Are you willing to die? Is there something that you're willing to die for? And I feel like that's an important thing for us because we can't really live unless we know that answer. When I was on sabbatical 15 years ago, our whole family went to California. We lived in Fresno, California. We rented a house, and it was on Kings Canyon Road. And in Kings Canyon Road, all we had to do was drive up that road up to Kings Canyon National Park, where the giant sequoia trees are. Right? There's a picture there. That's Ryan and Jordan in front of that tree. And this wasn't even the biggest tree. There's other trees that were even bigger. These are giants, right? And we were fascinated by them. They're like 350 feet tall, and some of them 40 feet in diameter. Some of them are 100 feet in circumference. They're just giants, 2,000 years old trees. What I found interesting in that time is that these seed pods that they had what contained the seeds of the trees are in these pods that are so hard, the resin is so hard and so tight that the only way that the seeds get released is under extreme intense heat. So they thrive in forest fires. That's the only way the heat actually melts the resin and provides the opportunity for the seeds to drop and into the soil and to germinate and grow into trees. Isn't that amazing? There are some things that are like that only new life comes when we go through intense heat, when you go through fire. So here's what happened next. Nebuchadnezzar says this in verse 29, "Therefore I make this decree, if any people, whatever their race or nation or language, or speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be," okay, Nebuchadnezzar, "they will be torn from limb, and their houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no God who can rescue like this." So Nebuchadnezzar is still a dictator. There's still pieces of his life that need to be radically redeemed, okay? So he's still a little bit crazy on this, because we wouldn't talk, we certainly wouldn't say, if you don't serve our God, we're going to tear you from limb to limb. But at least he's understanding the truth about who God is, that this God is real, that his gods are false, and that there is no God who can rescue you like this God. So that is so true. That's so true. There's only one God who can rescue us. The only one true God. You can't save yourself. Others can't save you. The government can't save you. The popular opinion can't save you. The only one who can save you and rescue you is God. And at the very end, we have this nice little ending. Because they passed the test, the king says this: the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to an even higher position in the province of Babylon. And so you have that example. Every time they pass a test, they get promoted. And this is what God does for us as well. So the question I have for you, for all of us here, is, are you willing to trust God wherever you're feeling the heat? Where are you feeling the heat right now? And are you willing to trust God through it? I want to invite us to enter a time of prayer and reflection as we contemplate that question. Let's bow our heads. And just think about what pressure that you may be feeling. It may be financial pressure, it may be sexual pressure, it may be pressure at your job, or peer pressure, pressure to conform. Maybe you're having the pressure to worship worldly values and worldly images and idols in our culture. So where are you feeling the heat today? And would you be willing to trust God in the midst of that? As we bring this before God, as we think about this, you could maybe pray something like this. Say, dear God, you know the problems that I'm facing right now. You know the problems that I will be facing in the future as well. You know the fire that I'm going to go through. And I want to be like these men who stood for the truth, that didn't need to worry about defending themselves or defending you. And Father, I'm just going to thank you that you have the power to save and deliver, no matter what the problem, no matter how big it may be. But not only do I know that you can save me, but I believe you will, because that's what you've promised. You said that when I go through these problems, you'll be with me and you'll save me. So I thank you in advance that that's what's going to happen. Even when I go through the darkest and deepest times of my life. And Father, even if you don't take me out of this problem, I will still serve you. I'm not going to bow down to those false gods. I know what's truly worth dying for. I'm not going to worship false images, no matter what else other people think. So God, I'm going to trust you, that you will do these things as you did for these young men, that you will walk with me through the fire. I don't want to be manipulated by what other people, if they approve of me or accept me or anything like that. I don't want to worry about those things. I want to be fearless. I want to stand for the truth no matter what. Thank you that you've given me the promise that will come out unharmed. And God, use the pain that I'm going through. I want to demonstrate the faith that these men had, so that others will see that faith. It will be contagious, and they would see what you are doing in my life. So help me to trust you so that other people would see that. So, Father, I declare my love for you, my commitment to you, and I again declare my desire to have you Lord of my life, that you would direct my life in every area. And I love you. In Jesus' name, amen.